So we got coming up on the horizon line. On the horizon, a spirit of revival like the world has never seen. This time around, the revolution will not be televised. Step. What do we got coming up? We got just the stream to end all streams. The last stream we'll ever need. On Nathan's channel, sometime I think at the end of December, right before the new year, I think, is what's his face? Graham Oppy. I guess it's just a conversation with Bernardo Kastrup. That's going to be epic. That's going to be the one to watch. Now, that will be forever putting the points on the board that I wanted to be put on the board with the James Fodor inspiring philosophy debate. I don't know if it's going to be a debate or a conversation. I think it's going to be more of a conversation. But as I've been saying numerous times in my videos, and that is going to be a more important conversation than anything else that goes on in between now and then, almost guarantee it. Anything you see on the atheist experience, take it, flush it down the toilet, why it ain't relevant. It ain't happening, it ain't there, it ain't with it. It don't matter. It don't mean a thing. Because it ain't got that swing. I can think of nothing else that's going to be as relevant. Why? Because the most important conversation that can be had relevant to this space is materialism versus idealism. And as I said, if the choice is binary, idealism wins hands down. Idealism wins hands down, and this should demonstrate that conclusively. Why? Because Graham Oppy is intelligent enough and has enough integrity that if he yields to the logic of the Bernardo Kastrup postulate, which some parts of his postulate, the logic is inescapable, it will put some points on the board for idealism, which is effectively putting a lot of points on the board for theism. Now, you can be an idealist. Bernardo Kastrup does not call himself a theist. You can be an idealist and be an atheist or an agnostic. It's easy to do. The only thing I'm pointing out is something I've said time and time again. If the choice were binary between materialism and idealism, idealism wins hands down. As of right now, the choice is binary. There are other options on the table, for example, conscious realism, but that's kind of a form of idealism. But they usually lean one or the other. Now, why is it hands down? Think of it this way, and if you're an atheist or an agnostic listening to me, listen up and listen carefully. Why? Because here's your worldview in a nutshell. Can't tell me worldview, atheism worldview, it's all epistemic. Relax, deep breaths. It's not a worldview, Craig, can't tell me it's a worldview, you can't tell me what my worldview is. It's just okay, calm down. Deep breaths. Deacon Verman, deep breaths. Here's what most atheists believe, because it's basically what they think. That the fundamental building blocks, the ontological primitive, the fundamental building blocks of reality are only matter, time, space, and energy. Correct? Most atheists, most agnostics will tell you that. There are no gods, there are no demons, there's nothing to metaphysically speculate about. Why? There's no evidence for it. Okay, fair enough. But here's the problem. Even if that is your paradigm, and that's almost every atheist and agnostic I could ever think of, that's what they're going to say the ontological primitive. Matter and energy. Correct? Nothing else. Even if that is your basic philosophical paradigm, the only epistemic access you have to matter and energy is through consciousness. Right? Right? Yeah, right. Consciousness itself is the ontological primitive. It's the only starting point that makes sense. You cannot learn anything about matter and energy. You cannot learn anything about space and time without having an experience in consciousness, correct? You can't read about matter without having an experience in consciousness. As far as I'm concerned, it's a slam dunk. Consciousness itself is the ontological primitive, is the only starting point that makes sense. And furthermore, I believe that quantum mechanics has conclusively and irrefutably taken materialism off the table as a useful paradigm now and for forever. Amen. And I'm almost positive that's 100% true. And that will probably come out in this conversation. How has it done that? what quantum mechanics has taught us about the nature of reality itself, conclusively, is that reality is one. Now, this is according to Carlo Rovelli, but he is perhaps the greatest physicist alive today, working aside from Penrose and maybe that other guy, Nami. I think that's his name. Reality itself is one, granular, which means it can be broken down to its smallest possible components. That's consistent with materialism. 2, indeterminate. Oh, gotcha. Gotcha, materialist, gotcha. Yeah, I did. Indeterminate. Quantum mechanics teaches us the nature of reality itself is indeterminate. That is a big foil for a materialist. It is probabilistic. That is the part about quantum mechanics that trips out a lot of the scientists. Why? Because they are at heart materialists. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle teaches us conclusively, mind you, that if we know the position of a particle, we can't know its momentum, and vice versa. Baked into the cake is uncertainty. And more important, it cannot be known. That's the part that really trips everybody out. That's the core mystery. So you've heard of the wave-particle duality. Prior to measurement, the particle exists in a wave-particle duality, a wave of probability. A probability has not occurred yet. So not only it's deeper than we can't just know where it's going to be. We don't know. It's deeper than we don't know where that particle is going to be. It's we can't know where that particle is going to be. Why? Because it hasn't occurred yet. Now that's the core mystery. That's it. Seems to be what the physics are completely implying. And that's literally almost impossible to wrap your brain around. And that's why they talk about, that's why quantum mechanics is so mysterious. Oh my God. Ah. And they had a response. It's called the Copenhagen interpretation, which is effectively don't interpret. Shut up and calculate. Shut up. What does this all mean anyway? Shut up. Just run the data. Shut up. Nobody cares. Don't ask. Why? Because it freaks us out. Because it's freaking us to freak out. That's why. Just be quiet. Run the data. Shut up and calculate. Why? Because we're freaked out. Now, the third aspect of reality that quantum mechanics tells us is the nature of reality itself, and this absolutely annihilates materialism as a candidate option, is relational. Bang! Gotcha, got all of you. Got everyone. Sean Carroll, all of you. any materialist left. I got you all. Why? Because reality is relational, and that is conclusive. So, in a sense, to say that there are a set of properties over there, which is what materialism has been telling us the whole time. I have a steel desk. That steel desk is a set of properties over there that can be objectively verified for. That is only true, relatively speaking. It isn't true. It isn't, literally speaking, true. It's only true, relatively speaking, for a certain period of time relative to other properties. Now, quantum mechanics teaches that case closed, conclusive. The reason why it took so long could have been understood prior to the quantum era, by the way. It's really not that complicated and hard to wrap your brain around there. Scientists are exaggerating the paradoxical nature of quantum mechanics. They're exaggerating how trippy it is. As I've said in the past, if you're a theist or you've taken psychedelic drugs, mushrooms doesn't really trip you out all that much. You're like, yeah, I could have told you that a long time ago. Haven't you ever listened to a Grateful Dead song? All it's telling us is that the nature of reality itself is a lot more porous and ethereal than your hard-headed materialists would have liked to have previously imagined. If you had asked any scientists to give you a proper metaphor for reality circa 1908, every single solitary scientist, every single physicist would have said the exact same thing. Reality itself the metaphor for reality would have been some big clock-like or mechanistic device. Almost every scientist would have said that. Some still say that, but it's no longer a proper metaphor. Why? Because reality itself is more porous and ethereal and relational than they had previously understood. So the proper metaphor today would be a great big interactive, entangled, web-like thingy-mabob. That's a pretty clumsy metaphor, Craig. Yeah, I understand that. That's why The philosophy has not caught up with the physics, but the physics don't lie. And the physics, you can rest assured that I'm telling you the truth about the physics, and this is what the physics clearly imply. The only thing going on is trying to wrap your brain around what the physics are actually saying, which is what the interpretations of quantum mechanics is trying to do. But the fact that reality itself is relational is case closed true. Absolutely, demonstratably, knowably fact. So, think of it this way. Some ways that you can wrap your brain around so you can clearly understand what I mean. If I say to you a steel table, if I say to you, where is that steel table? You say, it's right in front of your face, Craig, I knew it was stupid. Okay, that's where it is relative to me. You understand that, right? The steel table, when I ask you, where is that steel table, I can tell you where it is relative to me. And I've used the example in the past of velocity. Velocity has no standalone ontology. So if I ask you how fast is the train going, it's an incoherent question. It can only be answered relative to your position. These are facts, guys. This isn't up for debate. These are facts. So if I'm standing on the ground watching the train go by, it's going 100 miles an hour. If I'm standing inside the train, it is standing still. So there is no standalone ontology to the idea of velocity. It is only a fact relative to other facts. The only thing you need to wrap your brain around is that the quote-unquote real material world is the exact same idea. It's hard to wrap your brain around that fact, but it's a fact and it's not impossible. Do you understand? No. Okay. No. Okay, well, check it out. This will help you understand, and I'm telling you the God's honest truth. So, say you have a steel table made out of steel. Your old-fashioned materialist circa 1898 would say, here are the properties of the steel table relative. These are the properties of the steel table. If I heat it up to 100 degrees, it melts, and tells you all the properties of the steel table. Those properties that you say are facts are only facts, relatively speaking. They are only temporarily true of that steel table. At the macro level, this is irrelevant. Why? Say I want to build an airplane. The facts that the guy writes down about the steel table will be true enough. It's like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. It exists at the macro level too. What? But the discrepancies are too small for us to care about. But if I'm telling you about the steel table, there's a set of objectively verifiable facts about that steel table, kind of, sort of, enough for you to build an airplane. At the macro level, it's true, but at the quantum level, no, it's not true. As soon as that steel table comes off the assembly line, this is just to help you understand what's starting to happen immediately, starting to rust, right? Correct? So if I left that steel table out in the open for, let's say, a year, rust would start to form on the corners, correct? Everyone understands that's true, right? Okay, if I left it out there for 50 years, half of it would be corroded and rusted over. So at the macro level, there's a set of objectively verifiable facts about that steel table that are only temporarily and relatively speaking true. At the quantum level, it's not really true at all. Say I was going to zero in on that table and do a measurement about it, and it had been out in the open for a month and started rust on the corners. If I zero in on the corner where it started to rust and start, doing experiments on that little corner, I'm already dealing with something that is other than the table. Rust isn't a steel table. It's already transformed. You get it? Now that could have easily been known prior to the quantum era. The only thing that the quantum era did was underscore the obvious, that there are no such thing as facts except temporarily and relative to other facts, material speaking. There are transcendent categories, like mathematical axioms, that hold true regardless, but when you are talking about materially speaking, there is no such thing as a set of properties that are forever and always true. They are forever and always relative to other sets of properties. That's the only thing that quantum mechanics is demonstrating, mathematically. It's not as trippy and mysterious as they're making it out to be. Wrapping your brain around what that ultimately means is hard to understand. But it's not really that hard to lay hold of that. Think of a steel table. If I had a steel table and I were telling you the facts about that steel table, so that I write them down on a piece of paper. You could build an airplane off of the facts I write down, right? The nature of steel, how it heats, things like that. But if I were trying to be really precise and give you a real true accounting of that steel table, and I zeroed in on the part where it already rusted a little, it's already different than a steel table. So those facts are only relatively speaking true and only for a period of time. Materialism doesn't work. Materialism is an outmoded paradigm, an outmoded way of viewing reality. The other thing I've used to demonstrate this, as far as I'm concerned, conclusively, think of your kitchen. I used to use a boogie board, now I'm using the kitchen. I've moved on. I've moved on from my boogie board analogy, and now I'm using the kitchen. Think of the color scheme in your kitchen, and try and wrap your brain around the fact that that is a fiction. It isn't actually there. There's no such thing as colors as an intrinsic property of anything. The color is the light bouncing off of the thing, and you yourself are creating the color scheme. It is a fiction. It's something you create. It isn't intrinsic to the item itself. Yes, technically you could tell what color your kitchens are going to be, and you can tell what color is going to present itself to a human being as. But colors are basically fantasies. They're not real. They're something we are creating. Just as the fact that the idea that the desk in front of you is solid matter isn't real. We represent it back to ourselves as solid matter. It's actually particles in motion. Then you also lay hold of the fact that there are visible particles by the multitude, billions, floating around in front of your face. And there's technically no reason why you shouldn't be able to see them. You can see a lot of things that are particles. You can see dust particles sometimes when the light's shining on them, right? So now try and think of what your kitchen actually truly looks like. There's no colors to anything. Everything that looks solid is actually not solid. And there's billions of visible particles that could be visible floating around in front of everything. You couldn't even possibly imagine what things actually look like. It's an incoherent question to some degree. There's no such thing as what something actually looks like. There's no such thing as an actual visual. It's an interpretation. And this is being proved conclusively. There are two people who are on the exact same page with this that I've mentioned before, Donald Hoffman and Neil Seth. Now, Neil Seth seems to think he's a materialist because he doesn't recognize that the stuff that he points out conclusively in his lectures debunk materialism. He shows you a series of color patterns, and you automatically interpret it as a dog. What he is telling you, and Donald Hoffman and him are on the same page, is that your brain automatically interprets things, not necessarily as they are in the way most useful for you. He shows, and he demonstrates this conclusively. It's not a dog. He shows you a color pattern that you starts to form as a dog in your mind. It isn't a dog. Everyone sees the same thing. Everyone sees a dog. It's not a dog. Your brain takes guesses at what it's going to see and finesses the difference. Okay. As far as I'm concerned, that utterly annihilates materialism as a plausible candidate option for investigation of reality. Why? Because it just told you right there. Reality presents itself in consciousness different than it actually is. The only starting point that makes any sense, consciousness itself, is the ontological primitive. It's the only starting point that makes any sense. Now, what I think is going to happen, let me see if I'm running out of time. So I'm going to be watching this. This is going to be the coolest one to watch, I think. This is going to be the debate to end all debates. I think this is ultimately a lot more important. The conversations that I'm having about the idealism versus materialism, 100 times more important than anything being discussed out there in atheist Christian land. Why? Because the same reason why there are a bunch of atheists now. Most atheists are materialists and scientismists. Most. And they think, because they haven't really dug deep into, where actually science comes from and how science works, they think that corresponds to what an updated modern version of reality actually is. Little do they know they are mistaken. They are outdated at this point. Circa 1908, every single scientist and physicist would have been on the exact same page as them. But now we have learned different things about the nature of reality itself. And these are facts. I'm not saying, What am I not saying? I'm not saying Jonah lived in a whale for 3 days, and I want you to believe that. Just try really hard to believe me. Try. I don't believe you, Craig. Well, try. Just try, please. Not saying anything wildly outlandish. No extraordinary claim that requires extraordinary evidence. Nothing like that. Nothing up my sleeves. I'm telling you the physics. I'm telling you what the physics conclusively demonstrate about the nature of reality itself. It is why Bernardo Kastrup became an idealist. Why? Because he will insist, and he's pretty much correct, that it is the only true interpretive framework that can make clear sense of the data. Why materialism is insufficient. Now, his form of idealism may go a little too far. We will find that out conclusively in his debate or his conversation with Graham Oppy. And then I hope and pray, everybody please pray to God, please Jesus, let it happen, that he someday has a conversation or a debate with Matt Dillahunty, and someday has a debate with Sam Harris. God forbid those two things should ever happen. Why? Because there's no way on earth either of those two guys, if it were an actual debate, no way on earth either of those two guys would be able to score a point against him, put a point on the board against him. At all. At all. I've listened to a lot of his lectures now, read 5 or 6 of his books, had him on my channel. He's thoroughly thought through the parts of this that correspond to that are empirically verifiable for. He's got a really good story of empirical verification that he can tell. Not every minute of his postulate is empirical and verifiable. Some of it is speculative. That's why I don't really dig into his postulate, which is, if you listen to my channel, you probably already know, but it's like a kind of stream of consciousness thing, and we're all disintended consciousnesses, within that stream of consciousness. I'm not entirely sure that that's successful or works. And trying to prove that to someone is just as challenging as trying to prove God. What I am sure of, and he will demonstrate to Graham Oppy, probably successfully and probably conclusively, is that the metaphysics of yesteryear, which is strict physicalism, reductive materialism, are outmoded. They don't work. They don't work. They don't make sense. And every time any atheist rolls up against me who is a materialist, goes, well, they don't know what they're talking about. I like to say what someone like you thinks they know what quantum mechanics has to do with materialism. They don't know what they're talking about. They don't understand quantum mechanics. They don't understand the interpretations of quantum mechanics. They don't understand thing one about metaphysics. That's usually what happens. The people who think that they got the jump on me are just confused about the nature of the subject of reality itself and just how far down the rabbit hole quantum mechanics is actually taking us. We're through the looking glass, guys. Materialism, the reductive materialism that most people still think is synonymous with science. A lot of Christians out there who are not signing on to reductive materialism in science because they're a little bit trembly. They think it means, they're going to have to let go of, not instead of let go and let God, they're going to have to let go of God if they start believing science. That's why they're not fully listening to scientific reality. They don't realize exactly where we are. Bernardo Kastrup's worldview is perfectly consistent with the science and the data. As a matter of fact, if you hear him tell his story, it's actually the reason why he landed on this postulate is he will try to convince you, and some ways succeed, that it is a better scientific interpretation, it is a better metaphysics for making sense, more parsimonious, more logically consistent way of making sense of the data itself, of what science is actually telling us. And on some of those stories that he tells, he's 100% correct. So him and Graham Oppy, I can think of no better person for him to have a conversation with, except for Sam Harris and who's the other guy? Who's the other guy? Matt Dillahunty. I can think of no better person for him to have a conversation with than Graham Oppy. So I, for one, will be all ears. I will be tuning in and be totally attentive. But even if for some mysterious reason Graham Oppy gets the better, which I don't see how, okay, that doesn't change the nature of, all he did was tune me into the fact that physics is basically debunked. Reductive materialism of the type that most atheists still think is synonymous with science is over. Science itself has proved that it doesn't work. It's done. The old metaphor for reality that most physicists and most scientists would have told you circa 1908 it's a great big clock-like mechanistic thingy. A great big clock mechanistic thing. Deterministic. We've found case closed that isn't true. First of all, reality itself is indeterminate and relational. So the new, updated metaphor for reality itself would be a great big interactive web-like entangled thingamabob. And as I said, that's quite a clumsy metaphor, Craig. Okay, that's what I said. It's a pretty clumsy metaphor. So I prefer God. God. We'll get there. We'll get there, kids. In another video, I'll tie this all into my Sky Fairy and how it demonstrates conclusively, or not conclusively, but how it demonstrates my Sky Fairy tied up in a pretty little package and get your ties. But that is all this video is talking about for now. Pay attention. Go watch that Oppy, Bernardo Kastrup conversation as if your very life depended on it. Why? Because it's going to be the one. It is the one to watch of everything going on in this space in the next few months. That's probably going to be by far the most important. That's what I say. That's what I predict. So there you have it, kids. With that, I will leave you. Yeah, a little rambly, but for the most part, on point. I'm going to go into that steel box metaphor a lot. I think that steel box is going to really help people understand what quantum mechanics teaches about the nature of reality. The reason why the scientists have their trouble wrapping their brain around it is because things that are at the macro level are different than they are at the quantum level. Remember that. The discrepancies that the quantum level tell us are there are irrelevant at the macro level. You can still know things. There's a steel box in front of you at the macro level. It's going to be there when you fall asleep at night. There are properties about it that don't change. Why? Because the precision required for quantum mechanics isn't necessary for science at the macro level. That's the real difference. When you're dealing with the quantum level, the precision, it is ultra precise. That's why I said there's going to be very little wiggle room. There's going to be very little arguing with me in the years to come. Why? Because the mathematics is precise. There aren't 15,000 different interpretations of quantum mechanics. There are roughly 10. And of those 10, roughly 5 are mainstream. That's a fact. Why is that a fact? Because the physics are precise. The mathematics involved in the Schrodinger wave, the wave-particle duality, the mathematics involved in relativity, the mathematics involved in all of it, precise. There's not a lot of wiggle room. There's only a handful of philosophies that are going to correspond to the data as to the facts as we know them to be, to the facts as we understand them. Only a handful of philosophies. And one of those philosophies that no longer works is reductive materialism. That is all for now. Case closed. That is all for now. Mass is ended. Go in peace. Amen.